I went through all 32 NFL teams to figure out exactly how each coach affects your fantasy football team. Today's episode, the Philadelphia Eagles. So, did they make any changes to the coaching department? Yes, they did. They brought a new defensive coordinator and that of Sean Desai. But on the offensive side of the ball, we still have Nick Sirianni and Brian Johnson. Sirianni primarily specializes in quarterbacks. Although his time with the Chiefs was primarily focused around wide receivers, his work with quarterbacks is emphasized with the Chargers, the Colts, and now the Eagles. Brian Johnson also working with quarterbacks. It's primarily seen with his time with the Eagles. But what changes did this team make in the offseason? They definitely switched up their defense a little bit. These are the theoretical notable departures, and for the most part it seems they filled those gaps via free agency and the draft. But now that we have a basic understanding of exactly how the Eagles attack this offseason, we can start diving into exactly how the coaches affect our various fantasy football teams. Before we do that though, we need to see exactly how the Eagles are projected to go about this season. They're supposed to place first in their division and go somewhere between 11 and 12 wins. They're also supposed to be an absolute lock for the playoffs. Am I going to disagree with this? No. I do think that they might fall short in their division, but we'll see exactly how that plays out. But now that we've laid the foundation for exactly how the Philadelphia Eagles have attacked this offseason, we can start to dive into exactly how Brian Johnson and Nick Sirianni affect our various fantasy football teams. So to start off with, the quarterback position, Jalen Hurts. I didn't put up two charts here because Brian Johnson's time in a lead role is so limited, and on top of that, it's kind of easier to go with Nick Sirianni in this kind of example. And from what we're seeing from the QB total here, it looks to be in an overall uptrend, which is something really nice to see with Jalen Hurts. And I don't see how it really declines considering this offensive line is the exact same thing. And really nothing's changed on the offensive side of the board. And I feel like with a more competitive game script, he actually has a really good argument to take another step further. But I'd really just be projecting him in the same range. I think 24 fantasy points per game is really safe for Jalen Hurts considering he averaged 25 last year. But I will note, I have not been buying him in any drafts this year. Not because I'm against him in overall kind of the uptrend, it's just his price point is so high. Moving over to the RB1, it seems somewhat static and kind of in a downtrend right here, and I think that's kind of fair. I mean, when you have Jalen Hurts taking away a lot of the rush attempts for the running back, it's kind of hard to really be super optimistic about anybody coming into this field. At the second in time, it's supposed to be DeAndre Swift, and looking at the charts, as we kind of pointed out here, it's kind of looking like it's almost in a downtrend. So for me, I'm going to go with a 12 to 13 fantasy point per game range for whoever is the running back in this field, but we're going to see some really nice spike weeks here and there, depending upon exactly how they play with the rock. Moving over to the RB2, and that appears to be in a bit of an uptrend. Now, considering it's kind of an overall up and down kind of spiking kind of pattern here, I think we can safely assume it's going to take a slight step down, and we can kind of project about 9 to 10 fantasy points per game. Moving over to the wide receiver 1, and that is A.J. Brown. Now, to me, this does appear to be emerging into an uptrend. But I think saying A.J. Brown is going to take another step forward this year might be a little bit of an egregious take, considering we do have Devontae Smith in that offense as well. Do I think the Eagles are going to be in more competitive game scripts? 100%. But I think putting a minimum of 17 fantasy points per game is a pretty safe spot for someone like A.J. Brown. And he realistically is a guy that could easily take another step forward, but when you have that quality of a receiver of Devontae Smith, it's hard for me to project you too high. Because more often than not, if you're a guy that's finishing in the top 10, you pretty much have the role locked down to yourself completely. Albeit there was a massive exception to last year and years prior where there has been two guys from the same team entering into the top 10, but it's not the most common occurrence. Moving over to the wide receiver 2, and that is Devontae Smith. I think he's very fairly priced where he's going at in most drafts, considering he's going to be a guy that has insane spike weeks. But I also look at this chart and see an overall uptrend. So I'm going to go with 14.5 fantasy points per game for his kind of average as a baseline. And I really wouldn't be surprised if this takes another step forward. Considering he's the wide receiver 2 to A.J. Brown's 1, it's kind of hard to give him an overall upgrade too much because he probably won't be seeing too many more targets than A.J. Brown, but we'll see exactly how it all plays out this year. Moving over to the wide receiver 3, and that is theoretically Quez Watkins at the second in time. Looking at the chart here, I think we can boost the overall projection for Quez Watkins or whoever is in this wide receiver 3 role. I think 7 fantasy points per game as kind of a baseline is really safe, and who knows, maybe we'll get 1 or 2 spike weeks when it really matters. Lastly, the tight end position, and theoretically is somewhere that should be getting more work, but I'm not too optimistic that it actually will, and that is Dallas Goedert. I'm just going to kind of ride the median instead of saying he's going to get an overall uptake and say he's going to get somewhere between 10 and 11 fantasy points per game. And to me, I feel like tight ends are somewhat volatile if you're not in that like consistent top 6 range. So just kind of recap a little bit here. Still think the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be relatively elite. I don't think that they're going to reach those same benchmarks that they did last season, but it's not like they really changed too much from last year as well. Like, this team should still be an absolute fantasy monster, and you should be buying them as much as you possibly can. And when I'm looking at ADP and kind of cross-referencing that with like the other players on the team, I'm utilizing that to kind of estimate where they're actually going to finish more often than not. So I think this team is still going to be elite in terms of fantasy because they're going to be in a lot of back and forth game scripts. Because realistically, their schedule was super easy last year, and now they've got a middle of the pack kind of strength of schedule. So if you've been following this for some time now, you kind of understand my logic with that, and that we want those more competitive games. I mean, think back to the Super Bowl. Albeit it's not going to be a Super Bowl type game every single week, Jalen Hurts did rush for 3 touchdowns. As always, let me know what fantasy football questions you have down below. I'll make sure to answer them as quickly as possible. But yeah, if you enjoy this content, make sure to like it and subscribe. Got a video coming tomorrow on the Pittsburgh Steelers. But in the meantime, peace.